There might be trouble tonight.
Can be armed, they can be desperate,
Actually, rode into the crowd.
who are capable of tremendous destruction.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Singapore Confidential, a brand new podcast. This is a podcast devoted to the untold stories of Singapore. Stories of riots, violence, espionage, defense, all these great, fantastic, juicy, untold stories that very few of us have heard, and we've been gleaning them through reading really old newspapers, going to primary sources. And with me today is my co-host, Benjamin Chiang. Now, Benjamin was once the author of the social discussions magazine 5 Stars and a Moon. So these days, when he's not diving into current affairs, tech, or science, he spends his free time pondering life's odd questions like what is truly the best way to dispose of a body?
Yes.
That's something we should get back to at the end, at some point in this podcast.
And it's not easy if you think about it. Marcus is a film journalist, a lecturer, a screenwriter, and a director.
Did you say lecturer or lecturer? Because those are two different things.
Lecturer.
Okay, thank you very much. Please continue.
And did you know that he wrote and directed the first ever Singapore-German co-production, The Man on the Other Side?
Mm-hmm.
Was told there was a Cold War spy thriller set in Berlin in 1974. And this film is available on Netflix in Europe and Amazon Prime in America, but unfortunately not in Singapore. So how do we get to watch this, Marcus?
It is on every one of your favorite illegal streaming sites. Please just don't tell my distributor. He's very angry when I say that. But that is really the easiest way to get a hold of this film anywhere outside of Europe and America. Okay, well, enough about us. We are here to discuss one very interesting topic today, which is Singapore's Deadliest Riots. Now, I'm presuming since we're Singapore Confidential, there's something untold here. So I'm presuming we're not talking about the Little India riots.
It's too recent.
Okay, too recent.
Everybody knows
We're not
that.
really talking about the very sad racial riots of 1969.
No, and I think that one has been social studied to death. Everybody knows these riots very, very well.
True.
So you've heard of the racial riots, but have you heard of intra-racial riots?
I've heard of interracial marriages. I've never heard of intra-racial riots. But we're not talking about marriages. What we're talking about intra-racial riots. Tell me more. I don't understand that.
That's right. So we're not historians,
Yeah.
but we were very fascinated. This subject actually was of a great interest. We know that riots generally are a bad thing, and we see less and less of these riots these days. But would you believe that in 1854, the Chinese actually fought amongst themselves? And it shouldn't be too surprising. I mean, all of Chinese history is built on nothing but fight after fight.
Yes.
Dynasties overthrow each other. But right here, there's this very violent, very dramatic Hokkien and Teochew riots of 1854, also known as the 5 Catties of Rice riots.
5 Catties of Rice riots. No, so I'm presuming. Well, I mean, rice has got to factor in somewhere, but why is it called that?
Yeah. So to understand why it's called the 5 Catties of Rice riots, okay, we got to set the scene. Okay, so this is May 1854. Singapore is a bustling colonial port city, but there's trouble brewing. So there are these two very large Chinese dialect groups, the Hokkiens and the Teochews, and they're at odds. But the question is, why? We have to look at the tensions simmering in the early 1850s. So these weren't just cultural rivalries. There was economic competition.
Economic competition between the Teochews and Hokkiens.
Yes, we're very practical. It has to be economic,
Well, it's all about the green, isn't it? It's all about money at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's right. It is. We're very practical people. So the Hokkiens were dominating these the pepper and the gambia trade, but that didn't really sit well with the Teochews, who actually relied on these plantations for their livelihoods. You add to that lucrative revenue, tied to these industries. You can see why there were tempers flaring between each other. And then there was a rice shortage. In 1854, most of our rice imports came from Java, and the imports had dropped significantly. Prices were soaring, and people were already becoming more and more upset.
And I guess we look at like the 1850s, right? And Singapore really, since the British came in, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, It's a brand new. It's a very very new sort of fledgling colony. So interesting that you've got all these already 30 years in. You've got all these simmering tensions. You've got there's the Hokkiens controlling the pepper and gambia plantations, and the Teochews controlling something else. And in fact, we bring in this added issue, this resource stress, which is the lack of rice. But there's another stress happening. What stress is that? I hear something about a wave of immigrants coming in.
Yes.
And where they come from?
And there's nothing new. They were from China.
Okay.
And
what's so special about this wave of immigrants?
So yes, you're right. There was immigration problems. Nothing new. History repeats itself, just like today. All over the world, not just Singapore, all over the world, where whenever there are large populations of people coming in, the residents tend to be quite upset.
Yeah.
So yes, a wave of Chinese immigrants arrived in Singapore, and they were new. What do you do when you're new?
Mm-hmm.
You look for your buddies, your cliques.
Your Hui Guans.
I'm not very sure if there were Hui Guans at that time.
But your Huis, because I have newspaper clippings from that era which call them Huis.
Okay.
So they already, by that time they're already known as like organizations.
Those were the more formal ones.
Yeah.
But there were also the secret ones, and we all know where that led to. You needed these organizations to help each other. These are new immigrants, mind you. They come to Singapore. It's not as if they had Airbnb. They could click a few buttons and have a place to stay. It's not as if in those times they could type a mobile phone and say, hey, I need a job. But they needed the support of the community.
But I've read also something quite interesting about these new immigrants that came in. A lot of them were fleeing rebels from Amoy, which is present day Xiamen, I think, and they were basically if you've seen enough Wang Feihong films, that they're always talking about the Fan Qing Fu Ming, which is overthrow the Qing dynasty and rejuvenate the Ming dynasty. And these were basically last remnants of those kind of rebels, and they were basically chased out of, or rather they fled Imperial China after a failed rebellion.
Absolutely. So we're really refugees at a time when there was war, when there was fighting. I sometimes wonder why my grandmother or great grandmother left her hometown and all that. We're always told that it's to do with rebellion and general unease of a village. So as you can imagine, when people are fleeing, your emotions are not straight, and you've got political refugees as well.
Yeah,
they can be armed. They can be desperate, and they are also, they are prone to violence than an average migrant.
Well, political refugees, but also militarily trained because they were also rebels. So you had that. So tell us more about this. You had pre-existing tensions between two different tribes of Chinese, the Hokkiens and the Teochews, and you had monetary, economic reasons, and you had resource stress, lack of rice, and then you have this influx. So what happened with all of that? What happened in this bubbling cauldron?
Yeah, if you do that in a lab, you put different chemicals together, you go kaboom, right? So that's precisely what it sounded like. It went kaboom.
How?
So in May, 5th of May, 1854, it started as a very small dispute. So there was a Teochew buyer and a Hokkien shopkeeper arguing over the price of rice. And then, passerbys came by. Each one took sides. And you can imagine, one person starts shouting louder than the other. Someone starts to brandish a fist. Mm-hmm. The other will start brandishing a weapon. Next thing you knew, street fights erupted. Street fighting broke out. Shops were looted. Homes are burned. Chaos.
Wow.
And then we've got the British that came in.
Mm-hmm.
Police Superintendent Thomas Dunman called for reinforcements.
From what I understand, was probably the only level-headed person in any form of government who was actually attending to this thing.
Yes. And I did read that there was a governor, William Butterworth.
Oh, I love that name already.
Butterworth, right? who didn't think it was actually too serious.
I'm sorry, wait.
Yes.
Isn't there a place in Penang called Butterworth?
Yeah, there was. Yes.
So is it named after him?
I have actually...
We got to figure that out.
I cannot confirm.
If we were a bigger podcast, we can just put a finger here and say, oh, please researchers, check it out, and then we get it on the way back. So anyway, Governor
Yeah.
Butterworth. So Thomas Dunman, who was the police superintendent, he called for assistance.
He called for assistance. He called for Butterworth. Butterworth didn't actually think that it was serious. You know, there's something to be learned down there. That you took it too casually. Two groups of people fighting. What could go wrong? Nah. It's just the locals. It's just the locals having a tiff.
But we do get this sense from British rule that's always what happens. You get a sense of a certain fecklessness about attending to the needs of people who are not Europeans within the community.
Yeah, a sense of laissez-faire. Is that the word? Laissez-faire.
Well, if I'm not wrong, I think you're right. It's actually referenced in newspaper articles of that time. They did say a laissez-faire approach. But here's one interesting factoid that I pulled out. Apparently, Governor Butterworth didn't believe Thomas Dunman, and he actually rode into the crowd on a horse. I don't know if it's a white horse, but it'd be hilarious. He rode into a horse, and he was roundly pelted by the mob. Because the mob didn't know who he was. He was just this weird European coming in, and they thought, we've got no beef with you, but you're coming in. And so they set upon him, and he barely escaped with his life.
Yeah, that's probably what pissed him off, right? That's probably why he actually... Well, next thing that happened,
Okay, yes.
you know, that did piss him off.
Okay.
The police were called in, troops, Marines, volunteers were called in, Malay soldiers by the Temanggung of Johor joined the effort as well. So everybody, you know, tried to put everything at ease. And I don't know if you could you just imagine how it was. Chinese people fighting amongst each other, but you know, you've got soldiers, police, and they couldn't. You know, all the king's men and all the king's horses couldn't put.
Well, I mean, to be fair, you think about it, right?
Yeah.
You got Chinese fighting each other, and Teochews, Hokkiens fighting each other, and then likely, I mean, we got to go and check this out, but likely, the police force probably consisted of a few Europeans and then maybe your Indian sepoys, and then you had Malay soldiers from the Temenggong's private army coming in to quell this. I mean, you know, this is truly uniquely Singapore, like, you know, passion made possible.
Yeah, passion made possible.
Multiracial
Also
country.
an ode to Chinese kung fu, you know. I don't know whether you use. Okay, well.
So what happened?
Violence spread. It spread to city areas of those days. Paya Lebar, Siglap, Bukit Timah. It wasn't until 5 days later that the colonial authorities decided to take action. So they sent troops to the rural areas where they caught the rioters off guard.
So
and altogether it lasted 10 days.
10 days of rioting. So what I heard, what I read as well is that very interesting way of doing things. We got to remember back, you know, in 1854, really Singapore was not developed except for what we can see now. Your and anywhere from Fort Canning downwards was developed. The rest was just your rural space, right? So what they did was they sent all of the soldiers around Singapore. It was like a pincer movement through the forests of Singapore, culminating into the city itself. So that's how they basically flushed them all out. Very interesting. But then they did say, and I don't. Maybe you can talk to us a bit more about the aftermath. What happened? How many people died? You know, what was the casualty list?
So yeah, rioting lasted for more than 10 days.
Right.
When the dust settled, 500 people were dead.
Wow.
300 homes destroyed.
500 people dead.
Yeah. 500 people were arrested, but only 250 were tried. 6 were sentenced to death.
Yeah, but again, it points to a very light touch, kind of like we don't really care about you, kind of governing by the British then.
Yeah. You had to imagine the framework of the British. They're here to manage a colony. Some, you know, probably didn't want to be here.
Some would say to extract resources from a colony.
Yes, that's the narrative of the day, and it was a place to be managed, and you know, if there were ways to just stop this as soon as possible. It was also recorded that there were 30 junks that left Singapore for China shortly after, probably shipping off many of the immigrants who had fueled the violence. One may then ask, what would you do if you were the government after this disaster? Go back to bed?
Well, no. Well, I mean, okay. If I'm this government right now, of course, then you'd have a committee of inquiry. You would bring all of these people up and have witnesses and a very long process, a very public, transparent process, and say what happened. I don't know what the CID of that period would be called, but you'd have a brand new kind of thing. And knowing if if the British of that time were as kiasu as the government of today, well, you'd have brand new police departments solely dedicated to infiltrating all these secret service gangs and making sure that kind of thing. I suspect that's not what happened.
Yeah. Well, so for one, they tightened the screws on Chinese secret societies, as most of these secret societies were the instigators and the culprits of a lot of this unrest.
Right.
What Butterworth did was reorganize these secret societies into the Singapore Volunteer Corps. And if you make a trip down the Beach Road, you'd see his legacy down there, right by this. What's this mall called? South Beach, South Beach. It's a fancy hotel today.
Yeah.
The Singapore Volunteer Corps is still there today.
Really?
The building.
The building is still there today. Right.
Later on, the Singapore Volunteer Corps would battle the Japanese during the Japanese invasion.
Okay.
And after that, when the reorganized secret societies in its new form found that the war had ended, the British administration realized that they had very dangerous organizations on their hands, because now you have an armed group of people, very well organized, with nothing much to expend their energy on.
Yeah.
So here's another factoid.
Okay.
So we're full of fun facts on this show, right?
Fun fact about the word factoid. Factoid actually used to refer to something that wasn't true, but we'll use it as a little fact, a factoid.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So fun fact.
Yeah.
The secret societies of the day were reorganized. The British government had them reorganized and re-administered. Because after the war with the Japanese, they were heavily armed. They were all fighting for a cause. They were men who were well trained, and they could do a lot of damage.
I mean, demobilization in any war is an very important affair. You don't want to leave a very dangerous, volatile situation in the hands of men who are prone and used to violence, right? So tell me, but there are rumors about what they ended up being.
That's right. So it was told to me, in order to encourage them to give up their weapons, the British government had the secret societies remodeled to fit the framework of a trade union that is very well known in from British in the British context.
Right.
So the secret societies then later became trade unions.
That's very fascinating. I mean, it's unsourced, it's a complete rumor, but it'll be fascinating to think that the fundamentals of workers' rights and fighting for I guess workplace fairness came from secret service.
And it made sense. And it makes sense. I mean, the secret societies were there to help the brothers who came from who's coming to a foreign country to find support, camaraderie, a place to sleep, protection.
I mean, you have the systems in place, you have the logistics in place already. So why not use it, right?
The spirit is there, and that's what our the trade unions of today do.
I will say this: I think any of the trade unions under the NTUC banner would take great umbrage with you saying that there are some things or gangsters now. So we're absolutely not saying that. We're talking about history here.
But that's another episode.
I personally know a lot of trade unions and they're wonderful people.
We should do a show together with them.
We should do a show about trade unions. Okay, so take us home with this riot. So we had Hokkiens, Teochews fighting each other. We had this undercurrent of money involved, and when we come back in our second part of this podcast, we'll talk a bit about other riots that have happened and how there are always hidden hands behind these riots, who are involved and who really caused them. And then when the dust is settled, 500 people dead. From what I read, a lot more killed in the countryside. 500 dead would be underreporting, probably more dead as well that we'll never hear of. Yeah. What happens?
It's possible.
What is the legacy for that?
It was a tragic chapter in Singapore's history, but it also shaped the way that the colonial government handled community relations. And it was from there that we see some of the modern mechanisms of today, how you manage an entire community of people. I think a lot of us underestimate the role that the People's Association is playing in our society.
Okay, so this is for me completely out of left field. How does the People's Association lead into like preventing riots? How do we go from one to the other?
I had this conversation with a very young person the other day.
Yeah.
I was explaining, how important it is to engage people, to talk.
But first, we have to mention none of us are from PA. Yeah?
No.
Right. We're not from PA, right? And we're not from NTUC.
No, we're not.
You used to be, but we're not.
No, sorry. Yeah, no more. But yeah, the soft skill.
Yeah.
Getting to know people and talk to people and getting people to express their frustration in a controlled setting,
right.
And that is so important. In another episode, perhaps we can talk a lot more about what the role of People's Association is doing. But really, the foundation of it is to give everyone a chance to be friends with each other. Where there is more conversation, there is less risk of explosion.
Right. I mean, it does seem to me that there are a lot of things to talk about with regards to this riot in the second half. But when you have a lot of poverty, when you have resource stress, when you have an influx of new immigrants. Now, I'm going to be quite careful in saying this because it's not so much that they were new immigrants, but they were new immigrants with a certain background from war and rebellion. And that was a real problem, I think, once you have that inclusion in there.
Absolutely.
And then you have basically a government that didn't really give a...
Yeah. So you know what I think? It's actually many factors altogether. Poverty alone doesn't drive people to do bad things.
Yeah.
Especially not a large group of people.
Yeah.
Anger alone doesn't drive people to do bad things either. Neither is it, government, neither is it a lack of resources. But when you have all these things bundled together and you have, two, they're not races, what do you call them again?
Tribes,
two factions, two tribes that feel that they don't know the other party. When you don't know someone, you tend to imagine the worst things.
Exactly.
Yeah, you may say, no, these guys are like this, and that's the genesis of racial attacks and all that, because you don't know, you imagine.
And it's not easier to draw a line between us and them.
Correct.
Based on race, based on religion, based on different dialect group. As human beings, we're really very good at separating ourselves from other people.
Absolutely.
And saying this is people like me and these are people not like me.
We are creatures of tribe, and there's a book written about this. So I think it cannot be underestimated, the importance of conversation. And you don't have that. You see, as we have learned from this particular riot, it took all of an argument, a street argument, to ignite an entire population.
And then 500 people dead and God knows how much property damage, right? Unfortunately, the only thing that really will stick in my mind in our discussion here is the image of Governor Butterworth riding his white horse into the crowd saying, "What's going on here?" and then being roundly pelted by a bunch of, Hokkiens and Teochews who probably who probably stopped halfway, beating the bejesus out of each other and just start throwing stones at him.
Yeah, getting his butter's worth of...
Getting his butter's worth.
Singapore is by and large very peaceful today. And in fact, a few weeks ago, I was just introducing my two little children. I've got two boys. They're 6 years old.
So there's more than enough rioting happening at home right now.
Oh yes. I have these riots happening every single day. Yeah, usually starts with a disagreement.
But no, it like I said, it starts with a simple,
Yes.
You took my
Why does
thing.
he have that green toy, but not me, Anyway, so I was introducing my primary school children to the concept of actually riots and conflict.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, you turn on YouTube, there's abundance. There's it is filled with modern day samples of all this. And the scenes are very exciting on television. We had a look at the Hong Kong riots. We there's plenty of that in everywhere in the world. And then they were excited. They were like, "Wow, can I go there and join them?" I was like, "No, you do not want to be there. Yeah, you do not want to be there. You don't want to be caught in the middle of a conflict. You could be stampeded to death. Stampeded, yeah, is that English? People could turn violent. They could attack you." So we don't want that there. And neither, and then I asked them, do you see this in Singapore? Have we had, did we ever say don't go out because there's a chance of a riot?
Yeah.
So I told them that we should not take this for granted here.
Well, I'll tell you the story. I guess it was told to me in confidence, so I shouldn't probably make too many details public. But I had a friend in a neighboring country. They had a pretty contested election. This was a couple of years ago. His wife was attending some event, and he drove out and he brought her home and he said, "You're not going out tonight. There might be trouble tonight." Can you imagine that? You talked about we've been social studied to death with regards to racial rights and stuff like that. But sometimes we, as cliched as it sounds, right, we really take for granted sometimes like how things just work here, and you don't get this immediate, desperate, dangerous sense of your life might be in danger if you go to a certain place right now, or if you just go out.
Absolutely.
When was the last time we had a curfew in Singapore, for that matter?
I had a curfew on my boys.
Well,
anyway, but really, I think there's a lot of work that has gone into keeping this peace, and we may not like it. Some people look at our housing policies and say, "Oh, wow, so niao. Only must have like that a racial proportion." Oh wow, you guys cannot gather. What was it? 3 people or 7 people in public, or you're poor thing. No expression of freedom, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But I think these laws to, and we've also got a lot of laws to control the formation of societies. You can't have wildcat strikes. You can't form your own trade union out of
you can't
blue.
have processions.
You can't have processions. So countries will look at us and say, "You poor things, you've got no freedom of expression."
Yeah.
But I think it's a trade-off.
Well, maybe we'll talk about this in the second half when we talk about other riots that have happened in Singapore in the past. A very quick roundup of those.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Right.
When humankind organizes ourselves as tribes, I think we're capable of tremendous destruction.
Great. And with that, we'll go for a break and stay tuned for the second part of Majula Presents Singapore Confidential, Singapore's Deadliest Riots.
At Majula Presents, we explain Singapore to Singaporeans one video at a time. We find out why our BTO system was created and why CDC vouchers are better than cash. Catch us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Majula Presents.
Hello, we're back with part 2 of Majula Presents Singapore Confidential, Singapore's Deadliest Riots. So, Ben, we've gone through the entire thing about the Hokkien and Teochew riots of 1954. So I did a quick Wikipedia check on the list of riots in Singapore. I just want to walk through some of them. And the one thing we realize is that there actually have been not very many riots in Singapore after independence. We had a lot before independence. We had the anti-Catholic riots in the in the 1800s. We had the Chinese post office riots in 1876. We had things like, of course, the Maria Hertol riots were a very, very big racial riot, which caused a lot of harm actually to race relations in Singapore, especially. And then after that, apart from the aforementioned riots of 64 and 69, also race riots, and then there was a long, long period of time, and it's only 2013 that we had the Little India riots. And not to underplay the significance and the severity of those riots, but it was brought under control in a couple of hours. And then we had massive, committee of inquiry. We had a lot of very transparent discussion about why it happened and how it happened and what can we do for it to never happen again. And then in the 10 years since then, 12 years since then, nothing. Thank God, right? The one thing I realized is that there are always all these really hidden hands in a lot of these riots. So you talk about your Hockley bus riots, right? There's a hidden hand of the communist underground that was working in concert with some of the student bodies of the time. You had your 1954 National Service riots. Also, special branch documents talked about how the communist underground were basically using these for their own, their own purposes, And of course, you had people who say, "Oh no, actually it was because of the political consciousness of the students and also the horrible working conditions of the workers at the time. And I think the two things can be true at the same time. You can have those fundamental issues, but also have them being whipped up by forces who have a hidden agenda, ulterior motive. The one fantastic hidden motive riot that I've seen, that I've researched recently, was the Chinese Post Office riots of 1876. And it came up because the British government at the time was saying, there's all these Chinese coolies, Chinese workers in Singapore who remit their money back. There's no official remittance process, so a lot of them give their money to remittance agents, and then what happens? The remittance agents disappears with all of the money, right? So they decide to try and create their own system, the British. And that pissed off the Chinese businessmen who actually had a monopoly over the remittance business. so it was the Chinese businessmen who basically whipped up the anger, got pamphlets written, paid for rioters, and then you get this riot happening again, Chinese Post Office riots. So we always see these hidden hands, So I guess my question to you would be, what can we think of? What are the things that we have been doing as a nation, as a people, to prevent these things from happening, to prevent riots from happening? You talked about it a bit earlier when you're talking about how we deal with race relations in Singapore. But anything else? In particular,
I think it's very interesting in a perspective of social psychology, and crowd dynamics. After you post-mortem all this, I believe that a lot of riots are really opportunistic. It's the right place, it's the right time. All the components are there. You need a crowd. You need something to incite. You need a catalytic event.
Right. A catalyst.
A catalyst.
Right.
You need somebody to die. Somebody get injured.
That's terrible.
I can't remember which riot it was, but a young boy got killed, and instead of giving him medical treatment, they used him as a catalyst.
Right. Yes, and paraded his body.
I can't remember which riot. That's a Singapore version. In every one of these riots, there is something that whips people into a frenzy. And sometimes a lot of people don't even know why they're angry, but they're angry. So there's a triggering incident. It needs to be symbolic enough. Is there such a thing as a peaceful demonstration? I think it's very difficult, because when you have a demonstration, the large numbers of people are there. And that's why we have, and I guess that's why we have rules against gathering of people in public places.
We talked about processions previously. I remember there was one time, again, earlier in my life, I was a photographer, and I was going for one of these temple events, because they've got quite a number of different temples along the same stretch, and a lot of these are not more than, say, 100 or 200 meters away from each other, right? And what struck me was how seriously the police took it. Like, you could do your ceremonies in the temple itself, but the minute all of them stepped out to do the same thing at a different temple 100 meters down the road, you couldn't walk. You couldn't walk there.
That's
you
right.
had to have buses. You go up the bus goes down 100 meters, drops you off at the next temple. You go into the temple, and only when you're in the temple grounds, then you can perform the rites.
That's right. I think we shouldn't trivialize
that's the thing.
these things.
When you're there on the ground, you're saying, this is ridiculous, it's stupid, you can just walk over there. But that's how seriously we take it.
But it has power, you see?
It does, and it's also a sort of like, no one gets to do it. We don't care who you are, no one gets to do it. Unless, of course, there's a exception like, say, Taipusam or Timothy or Pongo.
Yeah, and even that one, it's very well policed. In the Little India riot, it was somebody who got injured. Again, the very same
died.
Died. So these are the components, and if you were a skilled, opportunist
of crowds,
a ripper upper of crowds, you would use this to whip a crowd into frenzy, and there you are. We have a lot of protection against this.
No musical instruments.
No musical instruments, no gathering of people. And, it's basically to prevent these components from gathering. I think it's very difficult to actually engineer a protest.
Right.
But just like a piece of social media content that goes viral, you have the components there, fresh for the explosion, and there it is.
Well, but I mean, you know, it's not easy to create a riot, but, you know, there was a case of a protest being created and generated inorganically in Washington, D.C. by state actors. I mean, I'm not going to say which state actors, but, you know, we can always kind of tell who is belligerent towards whom nowadays. But they basically whipped up a fake rally for under $20,000.
Wow.
They hired the people. They got they hired some people. They got other useful idiots to join in. And then they had a protest in Washington, D.C. So it's not impossible to fund a protest.
$20,000.
20,000.
Right. Do you get Black Friday deals with that?
A coupon off with every fifth riot that you join. So Ben, you've given us a really great primer on Singapore's Deadliest Riots, which happened between the Hokkiens and the Teochews in 1854. Is there anything that strikes you as something something interesting about this whole incident before we wrap up?
Thank you for that. I think we're all explorers, surfing down the rabbit hole, looking for fresh information. A lot of this stuff is new to me as well.
Yeah.
You know, but I'll share the same thing that I'll share with my children. A lot of the actions that we take to keep the peace here really shouldn't be taken for granted. What works in Singapore is not going to work in another country, and you know, as much as we enjoy freedom of speech and all that, free expression, I think there are trade-offs. It's very hard for us to decide which is good, which is bad. I think there's no such thing. It's something really for all of us to always think about.
Right. I mean, I think for me, it kind of brings to mind Chesterton's fence, you know, which is I guess one of the great conservative thinkers from the UK, and he said basically before you remove a fence, if you come to a fence in a wood, before you remove it, understand why it was placed there for, you know, and sometimes for us, I mean, you go to, why do we have to board a bus to go to a temple 100 meters down the road and then come back down? Well, there are reasons for that. So we got to understand the fence before we remove it.
If I see a fence in the woods, I'd be quite freaked out.
I'd be looking for animals. I'd be like, where's the bull? Where's the bull? All right. Okay, well, with that, we've come to the end of episode 1 of Majula Presents Singapore Confidential, Singapore's Deadliest Riots. Like, share, subscribe our content. Ben?
See you next time.
See you next time.